our session today is really around building a smarter resource library. And why is that? Well, I think we think at Opus it's one of the most underrated parts of our, of what you can have as part of your training portfolio. I think as those who know, people forget, people don't know, need to know everything. Like a really good resource library can instill the team to be really resourceful, right? And help find things on their own. But the truth remains, traditional knowledge bases haven't been as accessible as they need to. And so it's kind of been known as the thing that where ducks go to die, right? And so then you kind of question well, how do I, is it worth investing in? And I think that's something that we're seeking out to change, because something that we've really focused on is accessibility for our frontline employees. We've done that with training and courses, and we see resources as a natural extension of that. And so what we wanted to do here is really talk through and talk with you. How can you make the most of it, right? Everybody has different parts of the business, different problems. And so it's not going to be a one size fits all. So there's really going to be a discussion-based discussion with everybody. And so before we dive in, I want to introduce our guest speaker today. Her name is Kathleen McMurray. She is the Director of Learning and Development at Starbird Chicken. We asked her to join and share her experience because we are snoopers and we peeked into her resource library and we really liked what we hear her approach, and how she really thoughtfully pairs resources with training. And so she very graciously obliged to entertain us with some stories and Q&A to add to what everybody else is doing today. And then, as always, we have Melanie Isola, and she's our SME, right? That you have seen time in and time out. So as Mel shared, we have too much content to cover. And so this is going to be a little bit of a choose your adventure today, because we really want to make sure that this is useful for you. And so we're going to kick it off with a poll. It's going to be around what's your biggest obstacle to building a resource library. And based off of that, we will start the conversation and then we'll see how far we can get. But we wanted to make sure that we hit what was most pressing for the folks who are live, and you guys are taking the time to join us today. So with that, my next challenge is figuring out how to start this poll. But let's try this one. And then if there's an other, please chat it, because I know this is not exhaustive. I think there's a clearer winner around unclear what resources to include, and then no bandwidth, and just how do we just bring it to life? So Mel, why don't you kick it off from there, there?
It really does sound like unclear of what resources to include. And I think to me, this is a great point of resource prioritization. And Kathleen, you've been a customer with us now for about 6 months, maybe a little bit longer. And like I mentioned, I went into Kathleen's library a couple of weeks ago, and they have over 400 resources. And it was so impressive to see how much you've done in such a short period of time. How did you figure out what to prioritize? What was your way of, just chipping away at what was needed there for your teams?
When we came to Opus, we had a fair number of resources already, but they weren't up to date. They weren't malleable. So we started by bringing everything over that we could, just for the base. So we really want to make sure that operations was supported. So the big focus was make sure the store teams have everything they need. And then made the decision to not bring over anything that wasn't up to date, and made changes to all of those things so that they were current. And then it was just building new things after that, when we had policy changes, or we changed all of our KDS and our POSs. So information that went along with that, menu change documents, things like that. So it really was just making sure that the store teams were supported first, and then everything else just kind of followed behind out of, necessity.
And then prior to Opus, did you give your teams, all of your team members, did they have access to these documents? Or was this the first time some of your frontline was getting access to documents?
This was kind of a mix of that. This definitely allowed us to segment better who was able to get things. So like there's certain things that like the general managers and the store iPad have, and then there's other things that other people, like everybody can have, or we have some documents that only like our guest service team members get, or only people that are manager and above get. So it really has allowed us to segment that a lot better so that people have access to the right information, but also making it so it's not like information overload. Like if there's a bunch of stuff they don't need, we don't show it to them. So it just really helps them with prioritization of information as well.
And how much of the documents at this point would you say, because I know we were talking a little bit, not everything is digital. You still have some items that are printed out in the back of house, front of house for lots of different reasons. What percentage of documents would you say are just digital at this point and also have that physical element as well?
Things that are just digital is probably 90% of our resource library. We're constantly iterating and changing in our brand. We're kind of in a growth stage right now. So we don't want a lot of things printed out because then we got to tell everybody like, throw that away, reprint this. Like I remember back in like the old days when there were actually like printed manuals and printed training things and printed recipes. And it was always like, oh, which is the latest version? So having everything digital just allows us to change and to move a lot faster as an organization.
Nice. I actually found my internship training binder from like 15 years ago when I was home visiting my parents over the holidays. So I'm sure so much has changed, and now it's a printed binder that I have all that old info. Not quite so useful.
Yeah.
In terms of, in addition to kind of the what of the resources, something else that we were talking about, Kathleen, was the types of different resources that you'll lean into. So sometimes you'll have sometimes it's just a resource, sometimes it's a training and a resource, video versus an infographic. Tell me a little bit about how you make some of those decisions, and I'll bring up some visuals as well.
We kind of do that a few different ways. Part of what we do when we're trying to decide if this is training or if this is resource, it's like, are we trying to change a behavior? Are we trying to teach a new skill? Or are we just trying to reinforce information that's already in the store or already given to the team members? We also try to think about like when they're getting this information, what's the scenario? Are they on the line? Is this information they need in the middle of their job? Like at that point, a training video with verbal instructions isn't the best because it's loud, right? And they can't hear it. So in that case, we go and lead more towards like a job aid, something with some pictures, a few explanations. So it just really kind of depends. And then we also try to make it so that different types of learners have access to the same information different ways. Mm-hmm. Some people do better with the video, some people do better with something read to them or something that they read themselves. So we try to consider that as well.
Nice. I do have an activity I'd love everyone to potentially try to participate in, which is, I think something that we talk about often, exactly what you're referring to, Kathleen, is it's not just about the type of resource, again, a video, an infographic, a document. It's also, should it be a training or a resource? And I think that this is a big thing that people struggle with. And if I'm wrong, please call me out in the chat and I can move us along. I do not have to do this, but I kind of wrote down a couple of resources and if they should be training or not. So love people to put in the chat or speak up, but a handbook is a classic resource that almost everyone I would say has in their resource library for good reason. And I'm wondering if you all believe this should be a training or a resource, or somewhere right in the middle of our Venn diagram. And if you have any strong opinions.
I would say for us, the handbook is definitely a resource.
Yep.
But out of that resource, there needs to be training about key points and things that are important, like uniform guidelines, healthy and safety, like food handling, things like that. So for us, that's a definite crossover in that Venn diagram because we have it as a resource, but we also have training to support that resource.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I tried to pull out a couple of examples from there. I think you're right. There's policies, there's certain procedures even that need to be trained on, but the handbook itself, I've seen people try to turn this into a giant module and let's just say it's going to be dry. And also I think, a handbook, like a lot of different resources we'll talk about today, is meant to be referred back to. It's not meant to be memorized. And I think when you think about what you're trying to train someone on, a lot of times when you're training someone, the goal is that at some point down the road, maybe not at first, but over time at your organization, they're going to commit this information to memory. I think we can all agree that it's a lot of work to try to commit an entire handbook to memory. So that feels like an unfair expectation. How about recipes? And Kathleen, would love to know your thoughts here as well. Is this something that you all train on? Is it also a resource? What are your thoughts about recipes?
So recipes for us are definitely a resource. We have our whole recipe book, so to speak, in our resources. But we take pieces of those recipes and train on them. So some things are a training, like we have the way we make our blue cheese dressing is a little bit different and not particularly intuitive. And so we have a video just for that is a training, but it also lives as a resource. So there's overlap in those.
It's sort of the actual recipe itself, depending on how many you have, your prep teams are going to need access to that time and time again. But then those make guides, things that they need to commit to memory so that they can just bang out as many chickens as possible. That's a good example of a training and a resource. Another one that I always think about that's really important for our front of house is sort of that service standards piece. I've seen it as both a training and a resource. Not sure if anyone has any strong opinions here, but where do you think that service standards should live? I come from front of house. I think most of you know I spent almost 8 years with Hillstone Restaurant Group as a training GM, and I am someone that really believes service standards should be committed to memory over time. So I would be someone that would put this into a training bucket. I think that there is an obvious argument of how it can fall into both, but ultimately, these really need to be trained on, and you really need to be reinforcing them over time. I think especially for just driving home that consistency and standards in your operation. And then, last but not least, this is something we don't talk about as often, but user guides, things like your IT. I think all of us, you're all chatting with an LMS company today. So you all are leaning into IT in some way, shape, or form and different technical platforms. User guides have become really beneficial to your teams on the ground and really useful. Does that fall into an area that is a resource, a training, or both, just based on what you all have seen so far?
I don't want to monopolize all the answers here, so I hope that somebody else has an answer besides me. But user guides, things like that, it really depends on what it is for us. But we have quite a few things that there is overlap where we do have a resource, but there is a training, especially for we have a lot of technology. Like I joke and I say Starbird is actually a tech company that happens to sell chicken because we have so much technology in our business. And it can be really overwhelming for new general managers or new restaurant managers. So we have quite a few trainings that they take within their first week to get them up to speed on how to use all the technology. And then we have quick reference guides and things that they can access in the resource library.
Yeah, and hopefully because they're using that tech, especially a POS or a loyalty platform or their LMS all the time, they're gonna learn it, right? And they'll be able to commit that information to memory over time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Want to move us along, but the one other piece here that I think is really interesting, and we have some customers that do some really interesting things with their newsletters, which typically I think a lot of people see newsletters as a resource. I come from, again, the world of front of house, where to me, my newsletter was basically my pre-shift notes for the entire week that I would drill into people's brains for an entire week of pre-shift. 3 to 4 pre-shifts a day. So I actually think that newsletters are a really interesting use case that fall in the middle that would be seen. Kim at HopDotty. Kim, you do some really interesting things with your newsletters. Do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, we just didn't know that when we were sending it an email if people were reading it or not. And we are like, what if we could track it? And so we, collect all the information from the different departments, and the training world owns the communication out to the field. We build it as a course every single week, and we can see who's reading the stuff. We ask questions to make sure they understand the information that we're giving them. And it's been a game changer. People are feeling more informed. It's great.
How long have you been using the newsletter course now?
Oh my gosh. Well over a year. What is time? I don't know. It's been a long time. There's no going back.
That's awesome that you found a different way, again, of doing this. I think my biggest call out with an exercise like this is some of this is obviously just my philosophy, Kathleen's philosophy, what Kim's sharing her philosophy, and you've got to figure out what works best for your organization. A big believer in throwing the spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks. I think that that's what iterative training is. So Kim, I love that you tried it and you stuck with it. Like the spaghetti stuck. So there you go.
At Starbird, we do similar to Kim, although she does it weekly, where there's no way we can manage weekly. We struggle monthly, but we do it every month. We call it the Nugget News. And it's just a really great place to, like, we recognize birthdays, we recognize new people coming in, anniversaries, information from like our marketing team. So we do the same kind of thing. It sounds like as Kim is doing at Hop Daddy, which is, but yeah, you can actually see who's reading it. We actually have a requirement that have 95% completion rate on those every month, and we normally get there to 100, almost to 100%. So it's just like a guarantee that your team is seeing that information.
I think this is a great way of kind of talking about committing to standards then, Kathleen, which is one of our, I think the second bucket that everyone said is something that they have to work on as an organization to get their resources going. And how did you all how did you decide that 95% was what you were trying to get your teams to achieve with like reading the newsletters? Talk to me a little bit about that standard and deciding that.
Training I'm beating the drum here in a group of people that are trainers. So, but the more information people have, the more informed they are, the more knowledgeable they are about their job, the more likely they are to stay. So for us, 100% buy-in on training is really important in this organization. And so we set that standard really high. Like all the store teams have to be at 95% or above every single month of their training completion. We put out a monthly safety course. We put out our monthly newsletter. We put out a monthly hospitality training for our front of the house team. We also put out a monthly course that's specific to GMs and our support team, so higher level, more soft skill based. And so we want to make sure that people are actually engaging with that information. So we do hold that to that high standard of 95%. And a lot of times we get to 100% by the end of the month. So just set the standard, hold people accountable to the standard. So it's really important to us.
Nice. You are just the training department though. So how do you work with the other departments to encourage that standard to be met? I think that that's something that I know I used to struggle with when I was in ops, is how do I get culinary and HR and IT to all agree to the same standard and hold everyone to it? For this in particular, this is a newsletter that's probably coming from all the different departments that's coming down. And then how do you enforce that and just get everyone to get along? Is that the right question?
Maybe. In our organization, it starts from the top. Like our CEO founder, Aaron Novician, is a huge lifetime learner. And so we are a learning organization. So it's part of being a Starbird employee is that we're here to learn and continue to be better. One of our values is personal peak. So it's always about trying to better yourself and get to a better place of knowing more information and being better at your job and being better at being a human. It's not even specific to Starbird work, but so it's a huge focus for our organization.
Nice. So it starts with the culture, to your point, and then
yep,
kind of
100%.
Disseminates through the departments there. In the poll that we did at the beginning, slightly out of order, but I'll bring it back up, which is why is it hard to commit to a set of standards? The majority of people answered that employees are set in their ways. Kathleen, what are some ways that you combat that at Starbird? And if anyone also has any ideas, please throw them in the chat.
That's kind of a hard question for us. We're growing our brand right now. We're going from, like 18 to probably 40 in the next year or so. So it's about having those standards set and then holding people accountable. So getting the training right, like making sure that the training is correct, making sure they have those resources. And then it's just about accountability, making sure that the general manager is holding the restaurant manager accountable, that the district manager is holding the general manager accountable. And we have different tools that help that. We have audit lists, we have line checks. We use check-ins for training and for other stuff in Opus, which gives us more information about how people are doing and how that's going. So it kind of comes from all different directions, and having layers of accountability and information that helps. that.
And I think those are the training elements that accompany, again, all of these standards that you're putting in place with resources is, are we training our general managers on how to give gentle coaching and feedback and how to get their teams to understand, hey, we might have done this a different way before. Now we're doing it this way. I had a regional manager that used to love to tell me change is the only constant. And I hate that saying, but he's not wrong. So it's just one of those things that I've committed to memory over time. I was clearly trained on that. And, you know, we were talking about this earlier, Kathleen, too, this idea that you can't manage to a standard until you've communicated it. So again, your resources are the communication of those standards, and you're allowing your managers and your regional managers and corporate to then manage to that standard.
And I, you know, as much as nobody likes an SOP, nobody likes to write them, nobody likes to read them, but they are important to just have that baseline of like, this is what we do, this is who's responsible for this, this is your part in making this work, and then creating training to make sure that you train to that SOP.
Yeah. I think something that I've noticed for some other customers, you know, I get to work with a lot of our customers, and I also was consulting before joining Opus, and people are sometimes afraid to put something on paper because they're afraid of the pushback, right? From the other stores saying that's not the way that we do this, or the slight nuance of the gray area of 20% of the time when things are crazy, you can't exactly follow this standard. And I think we have to push through that fear of being wrong 20% of the time and remember, like, we're going to be right 80% of the time though. So just put the standard on paper or else you're doing everyone a disservice.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of funny. The perfect example of that is we were in a restaurant opening recently, and the VP of operations came in and started telling people to do something different than what we had been telling them. And it kind of became like a, no, I'm right. No, I'm right. And so because we had that resource available in Opus, I pulled it up right away in Opus. It's like, this is our standard. This is what we do. And so, you know, as much as you never want to tell your boss that he's wrong, he was wrong. But, you know, it made it very obvious of why it's so important to have those standards documented, written down, pictures, videos, whatever it is you need to convey that standard, because it solves those kind of problems.
There's a comment here that I think one Kathleen can really speak to, but also I hear often is more just like when you have a managing team that is young, and usually they're the first line of holding accountability, and they're struggling. So how have you approached it? Where have you seen it go sideways? Or how have you tried to like coach those managers and hold them accountable? What has worked and what has like not worked as well?
I mean, for us, obviously we're not really coaching managers, but we find where there's pushback, and oftentimes try to make training around that pushback. So like trying to find ways that we can support the operations team in making holding people accountable easier. I mean, it's not easy. Like if people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, you know, you have to have uncomfortable conversations sometimes. But giving them the tools to make sure that they can have those conversations and have them effectively. When we are training trainers, one of the big things that we talk about is giving feedback and how to give feedback, making sure that people are trained at multiple levels of the organization of how to say, hey, this isn't what we do, this is what we do, and make it not about the person and make it about the behavior, because that's, you know, that way people aren't getting offense, you know, not taking offense to it. They're not feeling like they're bullied or being put down. Like it's all about this behavior that just needs to be adjusted. So making sure that, yeah, young managers get that information early.
It goes back to what you said at the beginning too, Kathleen, about culture. And just like, that is the culture of Starbird. And I think that sometimes that's how you have to frame it. I used to have to tell all of my team that they couldn't wear colored nail polish. Do I personally agree that they can't wear colored nail polish? I don't care what color you wear, but that was a company brand standard. And I would remind them of that. Hey, like, this is a decision that you're making. You're choosing to work here. So you also have to choose to follow our policies and our rules, right? It's got to be a give and take. And I think sometimes when you just break it down to that very simple concept, it will help your managers remember that, like, this is a decision that this team member is making, is to be here and to work here. And we provide a really great environment. Starbird is a great environment to work at. So you can kind of have that conversation with your team members on the ground. I think it's just about, a lot of times knowledge can empower and enable a team member in a way to like let them do their job better. So it's also just about giving them the knowledge. Kathleen, I'd love to share some examples of a great resource, if that's okay, that I found in your resource library. So this is an example to me of just a great way that you all set a standard and identified that you needed to set this standard. This is just an awesome infographic. And if you could speak to it a little bit, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. This is very basic. It's just what type of squeeze bottle tip you need to have and what type of shaker live you need to have, which seems so very basic and may seem like that's not a necessary thing to have. But what we were finding is that people were using a wide tip for Nashville oil. So when you go to like put it over the Nashville fries, there's so much oil. And so it ends up being, you know, just a boggy mess. So making sure that we have the right tips on the squeeze bottles, or people were not putting enough sauce on the sandwich, which makes the sandwich dry and the flavor's not correct. And same thing with the shakers, you know, like our lemon pepper seasoning is very potent and strong. So people were using the clear hold lids. And so much lemon pepper was going on things, and which completely screws up the flavor. So it also helps create consistency across the brand. So make sure what you're getting at the Starbird in Marina Del Rey is the same thing you're getting the Starbird up in Walnut Creek. So it's just a quick and easy thing. We change this thing 3 or 4 times a year with our menus. It's super important for new restaurant openings. People get that muscle memory of what everything's supposed to look like. We also have this printed and send a new one out to hang on the walls, because it's just such an important piece of the brand to maintain that consistency. So
I think sometimes it's the simplest documents like this that are the most meaningful. How did you, obviously you had mentioned specifically the consistency in recipes, but did you work with the culinary team? I mean, who did you work with to be like, no, this is a resource that everyone needs access to, and they need access to it in as many ways as we can give it to them?
Yeah, this is a combination of us and the culinary team. It's such a constantly changing document.
Okay.
That's why we always keep the date on the bottom of like, when did this come out? So we can, when we do a new menu, we have a slide deck that says, take this down, put this up. And so we notate that of like, take down May 2025, put up, it's going to be September 2025, to make sure that everybody's very clear on, once again, setting that expectation of what needs to be done and how it needs to be done.
I think the thing that speaks to me the most about this too is it's so specific to your brand. I think sometimes we try to get so fancy, and we want animations, and we want, you know, very curated individuals and photos and things. And it's like, no, like this is actually what your teams need. They need context. They need to feel like they're looking at this resource and they're in the building and they know exactly what they need to do. This isn't a stylized version of these lids. These are the lids that they use.
Yep.
You can run
Those are images straight pulled from probably Webstront or Ed On. Like,
it doesn't get better than that. And I think that that's just what I really, really loved about it, is to be useful. It can still be nice, and this is a well-constructed, thoughtful infographic, but it doesn't have to be overly productized or what's the word, like produced. Like that's not necessary for good training.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be over-engineered for sure. Like it can be simple and still effective.
So we don't have too much time. And as those of you that have attended office hours before know, I like to talk. So I'll briefly take us into the Opus dashboard. So you guys we can talk through a little bit of some tagging, and I can just show you, you know, our resource library here. So everyone can see my screen. Okay, great. I think. So I had mentioned this to Kathleen. I actually took that great PDF document, which it should be a PDF. You print it. PDF stands for a printable document, for those that don't know. And so you need it to be in that stylized format. I took a quick stab at creating what could be an Opus doc version of it for that translatable need, and just being able to, you know, have it in your library in a different way, you know, using grids, bringing in those photos, and just making it as simple as possible. So this is all you get, and this is translatable for those individuals that need it to be translated. So just showing, I think, a different type of style to what what you had put together here, Kathleen, and just to give people some different ideas of how to think about infographics and resources. Also, I think, Matt, you were the one talking about tagging, and I'm so glad Ray helped you with tags. So we are big believers in tag it. I put some gold stars on the ones that I wanted to share today in office hours as my way of reminding myself I got to talk about these items. And you can see we do multiple different taggings here so that you can see it's both an SOP and it's something for the back of house. As you use tags, it can help you navigate. I'm also a big proponent that your tag should be meaningful to your teams on the ground. Think like they think, because that's how they're going to search for items. So when you're naming a document or when you're tagging a document, really put yourself in the shoes of your restaurant, or better yet, ask your operators what are the types of internal lingo that they use. It can make it a lot easier for them to find and resource the things that they need. I know we're coming up on time, but threw together some examples of some Opus doc takeout stations, things like this. We'll actually share some templates for those of you that are interested after office hours. Let your customer success manager know that you'd like a template for either a recipe guide or for an SOP, and we'll send some of those over to you in the next week. Francis, should I let you take it from here?
Yes, absolutely. I was also just on the side chatting. There was a question around how do you manage the amount of resources, right? Like Kathleen, you have hundreds. That is impossible. So I talked, and I just was, in this interest of time, was slacking a little bit around access, because that will limit visibility, and it's both just a cognitive load thing. I also wanted to touch around like the power of search and why we actually as Opus really invest in that. That's multilingual. They can do that, and it actually looks at more context of the document than the actual title. But titles help. So how you name titles are also important. It can help surface things and how you structure resources. And then we're actually going to be building a lot of more to make that accessibility less overwhelming. To your point, Dawn. Kathleen, do you have anything else that you added in terms of how you've made it manageable for your teams?
I don't think anything extra what we've already talked about. It's just all about the accessibility and like only making things accessible that people need. Like one thing, we have all of our workman's comp packets, but we only make the one that's for that store available to that store. Like they don't need to see the ones for 15 other locations. They only need theirs. So we also use the QR code function for some things. So like we've made a poster for like workman's comp packets specifically, since we're talking about that. So there's a QR code for the English and the Spanish version. So all I have to do is scan the code and then print it if somebody's injured. So we're just trying to like make it even quicker to access some of those things.
That's awesome. Great. I know we're at a few more minutes, but one of the things that we wanted to start doing is taking a moment to actually reflect on what you've just learned, because you've just ingested a lot of information or really good examples, right? And so all of this is just anonymous. It's just more of like, take a beat. I'll be quiet. I think lots of really great stuff. Thank you, Kathleen. This was really great. The 45 minutes just blew on by, and I think you provided so many really great examples, and I appreciate everybody else who has sort of asked questions and also chimed in here on the chat side. We're very excited about continuing on. We have in August around refresher training, really specifically about like when you have staff that's only there for a part of the time, right? How do you get them ramped up really fast and to make sure that that's right sized appropriately. And then we have if you have ideas, please share it with us. We are open. There's Mal. I think you've always given an email. If you have, send it to your CSM, send it to me. I'm Francis at opus.so. We welcome all of it. And also, I think when you leave, you can rate, but also provide feedback there. And so we look at all of that and really take that into account, because this is very much about building a community and being a resource for us to share, stories and examples and build together. So with that, I will let you guys off. Thank you so much for your time. Kathleen, again.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Have a great weekend, everyone.